Everybody, quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind, but we're going to have a show.
I am delighted that you've all joined us today, or tonight, or whenever you're listening. So cool to have the crew in tow. I was in touch with Tony earlier today, but Tony is actually not on the show today. It is Albert.
Albert, thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So if you have a problem with levels, something's too loud, something's too soft, it's Albert.
Albert, thank you.
You can blame. Kim is here, of course.
Kim, how are you?
And she didn't throw anyone out of the chat yesterday. It was a pretty remarkable thing because normally Kim is she's pretty hot on the eject button, man. She really does blow people out.
It's not a daily situation. I don't throw people out daily.
I like the rancor. I like a little pot.
She's like an empty show. She's working the front door of the Mark Thompson
of the club.
bar.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. Kim works the front door. Mm-hmm. She's tough. But I welcome everybody to say whatever, disagree with whatever, and we will deal with it as it goes. We have an immense show for you today. Talking about John Rothmann, the brilliant author, lecturer, historian, and former KGO talk show host. He is a host of his own podcast now called Around the Political World with John Rothmann. He will join us bottom of the hour. Now, what else is happening, Kim? It's a pretty stacked show. Is Cory going to be with us, the New York Times bestselling author, Cory Doctorow?
Yes, we'll have him at 12:30.
What?
Of course,
don't say 12:30, Kim. People don't have a clock always. We have hour one and hour two. How many times do I have to review this, Albert? And
I think this would be the first time.
You yelling drop. I don't even have my why are you yelling drop, Albert. You weren't here, Albert.
Why are you yelling?
I'm down a whole machine. I don't have that machine. So why are you yelling? I cannot.
This is your last show of the year. This is it.
It feels like it. It does.
You need a vacation. I look at you and think this is a guy who needs to go on a 3-week long cruise.
What?
This is it. You got to go.
I completely disagree.
I think I could hang and would actually love to hang for the rest of the month, but I won't be able to. I am going away. But again, it'll be the second hour, bottom of the second hour. Cory is the New York Times bestselling author, and he has a new book that speaks very much to the time we're in. David Katz, though, is the guy who brings all the boys to the yard. That's right. When it comes to the law, there is no one who breaks it down like David Katz, the former federal prosecutor. He will be with us at the beginning of the second hour. Oh, no, did Mark not have his Coachella Valley brew this morning? Grumpy, B.A. Ware says. But it's a cruise. He might come back even grumpier, says Natalie. It is true. I'm not...
Are you ready, Mark, for the cruise? I feel like it's coming up. Are you packed? Are you...
I'm not packed, and I do have my new credibility glasses, Albert. I don't know if you've seen them since I've gotten
Don't lose those in the jungle.
I do have a kind of a nightmare in my mind that I do get lost in the Amazon. We're going to be going into the Amazon, which is yet again something I don't particularly want to do.
You have bug spray?
I was speaking to my brother. My brother yesterday. He goes, Mark, you don't understand. In the Amazon, there are all kinds of the medicinal aspects of those things in the Amazon that are actually curatives for many of the things that plague us today. I said, dude, I don't want to go. I don't. Great, get them out of the Amazon and bring them to Walgreens.
Where are my weed smokers at?
Yeah, I don't need to go into the Amazon. I'm not like a researcher. I'll be back in the lobby of the hotel with banging Wi-Fi, and you bring me back those curatives. R.J. Dunn, being Mark's last show of the year, let's drop a holiday bonus on him. Come on. How about it, R.J. Dunn with a 10 spot?
Big shout out.
Thank you for a super chat from R.J. Dunn. The super chats and super stickers are live. Mark should pack an extra life jacket and portable life raft just in case. Yes, says Jim Shield. Yeah, I don't know. I know I'll have fun. I just don't really. There are snakes in the Amazon, says Lynn. It's true. Yeah, I'm just not a hike in the Amazon guy. I'm just not. Unless the Amazon is a luxury hotel, then then I'll hike over to the lobby. Just go to Vegas at the new Sphere, and you can see the Amazon on the huge, incredible screen on their video that they are showing. Says
That's
Natalie.
Mark's style. That's
yeah,
right.
that really is more my thing. Anyway, it'll be fun, and I will try to send back video messages of one sort or another. If they're not video, they'll be audio. Let me just say this, and I'll probably make this point again. We've recorded some really good segments for you, and so there is a ton of content that will still be here on the show. Of course, with Kim every day, and then she'll roll in that content that we've left behind. So I have great conversations with some really cool people, and I honestly, I think some of our best conversations may be coming up in these days that I'm actually not physically here on the live show. We talked to the guy who wrote the movie Straight Outta Compton. We talk about just for something that's totally different. Yeah, we talk about the killing of Tupac Shakur and how that whole thing went. This is something that it feels like it's not even in our normal wheelhouse on this show. And then we do things that are very much in the normal wheelhouse of the show. And my mom and dad come through. My mom and dad are both part of things. So they'll all be running during the time I'm away. Quickly, Scott Rittenberg for your corkage fee. And thank you to Courtney. Thank you, Scott Rittenberg, and a big shout out.
Big shout out.
I have a question for you, Kim. Mm-hmm. Try not to come home with what is that?
Botfly larva?
Wow, is that some kind of
You add it to the list of what you're terrified of, Mark. Long list.
I don't know, some type of Amazonian risk. I don't know.
Wow, Jennifer, good knowledge on the larvae or larva. Mark, look for the Dr. No compound. Where is it? Phineas says, look for the Dr. No compound with the superfluous, that is a ding word, superfluous, space shuttles and launch pad facilities deep in the Amazon. Yeah, the old style Bond villains did occupy, those deep Amazonian passages. And then underneath was a whole network, where they were going to take over the world. Anyway, I...
Major announcement.
Cannot believe what I'm seeing on the screen.
A major announcement from the Mark Thompson Show. A major announcement.
Wow. From Kim C. A well-deserved vacation for Mark Thompson. Cannot believe this is your hurrah. No drops until next year. I am sure the team will do you proud. Just come back to us. Yeah, that'll be... What is happening? Hang on a second. This is because I was tweeting. I had to use just come back to us. Thank you, Kim. I will definitely come back. I will.
There'll still be drops. I got a good amount of drops here.
Yeah.
For at least when I'm here.
I just had this question asked me last night. Do you do all the drops? And I said, no, Albert's he's got drops I don't even have. He's got that it's mating season and they're hungry drop. I don't even have
right now.
Drop.
It's mating season. And they're hungry.
Yeah. Anyway, Kim C., back to you. $100. Wow.
Thank you.
Sadly, we're a crowd-funded show. I say sadly because it puts me in a position where I'm having to pitch for contributions, and we try to do it in fun ways. We try to do it only occasionally. But when you step up like that, it really does help. All of you who stepped up for any amount, it really does help. And so thank you, Kim C. Awesome. Pamela. Safe travels, Mark and Courtney. Kim will completely cover for you. I agree, Pamela. Pamela Kirby, big shout out. And also, I wanted to. Where's my big shout out? Is it
big shout out?
Thank you. Also, if I can just go back to Kim for a moment.
I'm not gonna cry. I'm not gonna cry.
That is cry territory.
I'm not gonna cry. I'm not gonna cry.
And Gail, you are HOF. Have a great time. We will miss you. Don't get abducted by the natives. See you in 2024. Big shout out, Gail.
Big shout out.
Gail has a statue on Thompson Terrace in the metaverse.
Very prominently figured right in the circle there.
Yes, Gail Guthrie's been with us since the very beginning. But I also they may be working on the statue soon for Kim C., who contributed the 100. You know, that was very cool. Thank you, Kim C. Again, Susan Roberts, happy vacation, Christmas and New Year's. Enjoy your trip and stay away from those snakes. We'll miss you.
Big shout out.
Big shout out, Susan. Thank you, Susan Roberts. That's so cool. And Harry says, for $5, once again, thanks for No Cars for Kids ads. Safe travels to Amazon Prime. Exactly. That's the only Amazon I've had. Thanks. Big shout out, Harry.
Big shout out.
Jim Shields, Mark needs to send the rod of equity and mercy to Kim or Albert for safekeeping. Oh, yeah.
I had the rod somewhere. I could just add that back into the rotation. I didn't temporarily remove it since it was a little too much power for me to handle. I
don't like to bestow those powers upon Albert. Although I think I think Albert is pretty careful about who gets the rod of equity and mercy, but that said, it really shouldn't be wielded by anyone except myself. I do want to...
in its sleeve in the Mark Thompson studio, quietly sitting and waiting.
Well, apropos of that, and apropos is a ding word, I will... first of all, I'd like to put Kim back up there. Kim C. Can you put her back up there, Albert? Because I do believe Kim as the squad leader today, but actually everyone, Harry and Gail and everyone, I'd like all of you to simply, if you would please, and I have to just get myself into a kind of a trance, to please receive. Just receive.
Receive the rod of equity and mercy.
Receive.
Receive the rod of equity and mercy.
Receive
the rod of equity and mercy.
Yes. A special day indeed. My God, the rod of equity and mercy. It takes me out of my body for a moment.
The Mark Thompson Show.
All right, I want to quickly get to, there'll be a lot of comments today. Here's Phineas. Ask Captain Stubing, Mark, if he has a menorah so you can celebrate Hanukkah tomorrow night. That's right, tomorrow night. John Rothmann may be able to share the specifics on Hanukkah briefly with us when we talk to him at the bottom of the hour. We won't spend a long time on it, but it is important. It is a holiday of the season, particularly this year with all this anti-Semitism rolling around. I'd like to spend a moment on it. Remember to line up a row of shots to drink that equal number of candles. Wow, that's not the way I remember it, but it may be the way we do it. So thank you. Norman Lear just passed away. 100 and man, what a remarkable guy. TV writer, producer. What he did with television was amazing. He really built in the TV sitcom. And remember, this is the early 70s. You're coming out of a sort of, if I can say, typical TV sitcom. And they weren't bad. You had the Dick Van Dyke Show. Mary Tyler Moore was on that, and then her show came. Mary Tyler Moore's show came later in the 70s. But I don't, those 50s and 60s, Father Knows Best, all of that stuff, with the laugh track which is fine, but the idea somehow that there was more of a limited form in the TV sitcom at that time. And then Norman Lear came along, and it exploded in two things that I think are important. One is the socio-political commentary that was built into all the Norman Lear shows. And the human condition, is also a part of that. And then this is what people forget. All of the shows were insanely funny. They were so funny. I mean, it was another level of funny. It's tough to imagine that you could do both, that you could somehow handle the socio-political human condition stuff and also make your show incredibly funny. He did in show after show. I mean, All in the Family started it. And then after that, you had, the Jeffersons and Maude and Good Times. And these are, more and more. Albert, do you have a little bit of the conversation with Norman Lloyd? This ran on that CBS Sunday morning show, and it's a good little It's just only a minute long. But go ahead, Albert, if you would, please.
Another day? How about it? Another day to wake up and look around and see light, to stand to the side or behind an audience laughing and watch them, their bodies, couple of hundred people as one, when something makes them laugh. I don't think I've ever seen a more spiritual moment than an audience in the belly laugh.
My way, with a sock and a shoe on one foot, I could hop around and stay dry.
The soundtrack of my life has been laughter.
And laughter for you is a kind of medicine, isn't it?
Well, I happen to believe it has everything to do with a long life.
And Norman Lear has lived quite a long and remarkable life. He was born 98 years ago in Hartford, Connecticut. When he was 9, his father went to prison for selling fake bonds, and his mother sent him to live with his grandparents. During World War II, Norman flew 52 combat missions over Germany and Italy.
And thinking about death, I don't mind the going. It's the leaving that is the problem for me. Going, who knows what's out there, that it can't be all bad. But leaving, I can't think of anything good about leaving.
Yeah, it's a real loss. I mean, when somebody hits 101 and they pass away, obviously there's a sense of, wow, what a life. And, you know, you can only live so long. It comes, that sunset for all of us. But when you look at his contributions, I mentioned All in the Family, Sanford and Son, Maude, Good Times, The Jeffersons, One Day at a Time. You know, it's so interesting, too, what he did with All in the Family. All in the Family was a pilot that sat there for 3 years. I don't know how many people are familiar with the history of All in the Family, but All in the Family had Carol O'Connor playing Archie Bunker, of course. And maybe you can find some stills, Albert. I think otherwise we're going to get demonetized. I mean, if we get demonetized, it's okay on this. The super stickers and super chats, we still get that. And we've had already a great bit of support in that area. But if you can find some stills of All in the Family, the All in the Family cast, maybe. And then what I mention it because it sat there for 3 years. It was originally a pilot for ABC. It ended up on CBS. Carol O'Connor, and then Jean Stapleton played his wife. Jean Stapleton was found on Broadway. She was a Broadway actress, and Norman Lear found her. So she became Edith Bunker. And, I mean, those who saw it, and it's still around, it's brilliantly funny, and as I say, just so searing in its commentary on the socio-political situation. And then what was the difference? They shot, I believe, 3 pilots, or at least 2. And you can see Rob Reiner there and Sally Struthers. Those 2 were not in the original pilot. Those 2 were played by other actors in the original pilot and in the first 2. And I think it was the 3rd pilot, the one that went to CBS. That's where they put in Rob Reiner and Sally Struthers. And then that cast went on to make television history. So All in the Family then cut a path for Sanford and Son. Sanford and Son, Maude, Good Times, The Jeffersons. The Jeffersons is a spinoff from All in the Family. The Jeffersons were the neighbors of the Bunkers, as you know. And I loved the idea that there was this black family. First of all, in the neighborhood, you had all of this stuff, this racist guy in Archie Bunker. And then you had them moving to this real upscale part of New York, right? And he, there he is. Is it Sherman Hemsley? Is that his, I believe that his name, who played George Jefferson? He's the racist. I mean, in other words, it's the black family that has a lot of the same aspects that Archie Bunker's family had. And all of those characters were just so brilliantly drawn by Norman Lear. It was a terrific time in television where you felt as though you were getting a social commentary. And as I say, and it was so funny. Then from that, actually, All in the Family, Maude came along. Now, Maude was B. Arthur. Again, that was a spinoff from All in the Family. She played Edith's, was it cousin? something I forget.
I didn't know Maude was an Archie Bunker spinoff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maude was an Archie Bunker spinoff. In fact, she came into the Bunker household. Maude did. It's Maude. I think you know how to spell it, Albert.
Yeah.
If you can grab a picture of B. Arthur or Maude. So she comes in and she's cracking the whip over Archie. And Archie used to be like king of the castle. There she is. That's her on Maude. That's her husband on the show. And Maude was her sister, says John Slade. Okay, thank you. And Maude was all of a sudden bossing Archie around. It was a great way to enter a character into this situation and have her kind of stir the pot. I thought Maude was the cousin. Yeah, thank you, Debbie. Someone. Can we get some clarity on who Maude was and the relation?
Google it.
Anyway, there she is on All of the Family. Thank you, Albert. With Maude B. Arthur looking at essentially, she walks into the situation and she sees Archie bossing around her. I thought it was cousin or anyway, bossing around Edith, and she starts bossing up. Yeah,
she's Edith's cousin.
Thank you. All right. Thank
An
you,
outspoken liberal feminist who was the antithesis to the bigoted conservative Republican Archie, who described her as a New Deal fanatic.
Exactly. An antithesis is a ding word. Yeah, I absolutely. And here's the thing. There was no sermonizing on the show. Okay, so you got what you got. In all of those socio-political human condition moments, you got what you got in the comedy and in the story. There was not this speech at the end that kind of, in any way would suggest sermonizing. It was terrifically done. And ultimately, Norman Lear had the entire thing reinvigorated by Jimmy Kimmel. Kimmel and Lear collaborated a few years ago and brought back episodes of All in the Family. They did the original episodes with the original script. So Lear's relevance is, up to the very last moment, right? And then, I'll tell you, I could watch All in the Family, and I could watch any one of these spinoffs for the rest of my life. Just utter brilliance and perfectly, exquisitely acted, performed, and written. A very, very special guy. And by the way, his dad, Norman Lear's dad, and by the way, I should tell you this, I read his autobiography. There's Kimmel and Norman Lear. Wow, thank you, Albert, for rallying that.
Albert, thank you.
Yeah. And Kimmel has to be, look, it's, as I say, if somebody's 101 who passes away, I don't care how old you are, I think it's still hard. And I think Lear and Kimmel had a special relationship. But the reality is that Lear was creating all the way to the very end. And as I say, collaborated with Kimmel, and they reinvigorated his shows. They did Good Times, they did All in the Family, and I think they did several others. So there it is, live in front of a studio audience. Different strokes, facts of life. This is a collaboration that Kimmel and Norman Lear had, and it just a brilliant man who will very much be missed. And I recommend his autobiography, which you can listen to if you don't want to read it. It's a good listen to. He reads it. So rest in peace, the great Norman Lear. Norman Lear. Can I do that again? Rest in peace, the great Norman Lear.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Norman Lloyd was an actor. He was 102 when he passed away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Norman Lloyd, a different guy, but also great. But Norman Lear was the great creator of so much terrific television and so much social commentary. So, in the next hour, I will explore Rudy Giuliani skipping court. We'll ask David Katz about that. In a moment, when I talk to John Rothmann, I'll ask him about what's going on in Washington with the budget and the recordings of those attacking the Capitol and how there have been, redactions. It's ridiculous to think that Mike Johnson, who's the leader of the House, right? We all know him now. And he's on this trying to essentially varnish, whitewash the J6 situation, all those people who stormed the Capitol. And among the things he's doing is he's saying, I want to blur the faces of those people because I don't want to incriminate them. It's like, dude, they lawlessly broke into the Capitol. They called for the hanging of the vice president. They defaced and degraded your office, actually, come to think of it, right? The office of the Speaker of the House. Mm-hmm. And you want to protect their identity? And then also maybe this just in. We already know their identity. The FBI already has all this stuff. So this is all theater. I think it's a distraction from passing a budget. Now, we'll talk to Rothmann a bit about that. I want to mention one other thing that's a little off of the beaten track, but you might enjoy it, and it does maybe involve a guess.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Steve Jobs' Radio Shack check is set to fetch a small fortune at auction, Kim. It's going to be a little like the check that Kim gets from this show.
Yeah.
The paltry amount that she gets from this show someday when she's, when this show is huge, they'll go, wow, really? It's just in you. Yeah, I still have my first check. I doubt she'll still have it. A few months after he co-founded Apple, Steve Jobs cut a check to Radio Shack for $4.01. That same check could now be yours if you're willing to beat the current bid of $27,500.
Was that for parts to build the first Apple computer?
Yeah, so it wasn't from Radio Shack to him. Thank you. Yeah. It's a handwritten check to Radio Shack. It's not clear what Apple was buying from Radio Shack. It was July 23rd, 1976, $4.01. Jobs would have been cutting a check for, I guess, as Kim says, parts for the machine he was working on. The check was cut around the same time the Apple I went on sale. Can you put a picture of it up, Albert? It's in the rundown. For those unfamiliar with the saga of Apple's early days, they say, the Apple I went on sale at Paul Terrell's Bite Shop, B-Y-T-E, right, in Mountain View. That Apple I sold for $666.66. And Terrell offered to buy 50 of the machines for $500 a pop, but only if they came fully assembled. Other hobbyist computers of the era typically had unassembled kits of computers. So Radio Shack, now, of course, defunct, right? There it is. They were the place where a lot of these parts came from. It was the biggest single episode in all of the company's history, said Steve Wozniak, noting when Terrell, again, the guy who owned that Bite Shop, Terrell's Bite Shop in Mountain View, when he bought 500 computers, that was pretty big time. So, anyway, the check for the $4.01 is expected to, there it is, fetch a lot of money. But right now, the bids are really being driven by only 4 bidders, it says. The current top bid is $27,500. In his 2011 biography of Steve Jobs, Walter Isaacson relates this story of Jobs' initial partnership with Wozniak when they were looking for a market for these blue boxes. The blue boxes were used by phone hackers to make free long-distance calls. Jobs sold around 200 of those for $150 a piece. And he says there wouldn't have been an Apple if not for Woz's hardware, that blue box. Last point on this is the second Jobs signed check from the early days of Apple to be auctioned. The auction house that is selling it sold a $175 check for $106,985. Anything signed by Jobs, who was famously averse to signing autographs, can go for a small fortune to the right collector. A letter from Jobs to a fan asking for an autograph, and Jobs declines the request for an autograph, but did sign the letter, sold at auction. Oh, this is interesting. Sold at auction in 2021. What did that letter sell for? The Steve Jobs letter, in which he declines to sign an autograph. Anyone have a guess on that? How much did that go for? The letter, and they're, again, sold at auction in 2021. Albert, I ask you, do you know, Albert?
Yeah, I'm looking at the picture, so I do see it.
Okay. Kim, do you know?
No.
What would you guess it goes for?
$5 million.
I'll remind you, the check from Apple to from the early days of Apple.
Yeah.
Sold. It was a $175 check. Sold for $106,000.
Oh. I don't know.
I think I'm sensing only marginal interest here, so I'm going to tell you these are good. If I can't get the interest of my own people, I don't know what it is. 75,000, 10,000, says Karen. The answer is, these are cute, these guesses. I just told you the first check sold for $106,000. 500,000 said Mackay. I'll give it to Mackay. 479,939. 479,999. There it is. Thank you, Albert. Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know. A piece of history. So this Radio Shack check, again, it was made out to Radio Shack. Originally, I thought that he had received it from Radio Shack, but it's for $401. All right, John Rothmann next. 2 months after his historic ouster, as you know, Kevin McCarthy has decided to resign. We talked about this weeks ago. We predicted this. And, between Santos and McCarthy going, I was saying this slim majority that the Republicans have gets slimmer. That's just one of the things we'll talk about. Still, at the same time, and I'm sure John will talk about this in the weeks to come, but it's worth touching on, it's very possible the Democrats lose the Senate in this upcoming election. So even as they gain the House, they may lose the Senate. We'll talk about that with John. Also, if I've got time, touch on the Tommy Tuberville thing. He's now going to end his blockade of these 400 military promotions. A lot to talk to John Rothmann about. So smash the like button like a boss. Try to cover a little
with your iron rod.
Norman Lear, and that I just thought that was an interesting thing that Steve Jobs signed a check. But now we get to the heavy stuff. Kim's news, the great John Rothmann, and then the magical David Katz, and then New York Times bestselling author Cory Doctorow in the next hour. Much going on. Mark Thompson Show.
The Mark Thompson Show.
On the Mark Thompson Show, I'm Kim McAllister. This report sponsored by Tenuta Vineyards in Livermore. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his forces must retain security control over the Gaza Strip even after the war is over. The Israel-Hamas war is in its 61st day after Hamas launched a surprise attack against Israel October 7th. Israel says it believes Hamas leaders are being housed in the heart of southern Gaza's main city. President Biden is urging Congress to pass a new spending package to help Ukraine in its war against Russia. Here's a picture of President Biden. Biden saying if the Russian President Vladimir Putin is allowed to take what he wants, U.S. troops will eventually be fighting Russian troops. The president blaming extreme Republicans for tying Ukraine aid to U.S. border support for all of this. The fourth Republican presidential debate is set for tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern from the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Runaway frontrunner Donald Trump once again skipping the debate. Only 4 candidates will be on the stage tonight. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, former South Carolina Governor and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, and entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy will face off against each other in this debate. The National Transportation Safety Board says there's a culture of silence about mental health among aviation workers. The head of the NTSB said at a summit the current FAA rules push those in the aviation industry to lie or deny help. The FAA announcing earlier this week it is creating a new rulemaking committee to help pilots and air traffic controllers feel safer after talking about mental health. All this comes after the case in Oregon, where a grand jury is declining to indict an Alaska Airlines pilot on attempted murder charges for an incident in which, after eating psychedelic mushrooms, he attempted to cut off the fuel supply and the engines of a Horizon Air jet bound for SFO. 44-year-old Joseph Emerson will face 1 felony count of endangering an aircraft and 83 counts of reckless endangerment. That's a misdemeanor. He had faced 83 felony counts of attempted murder for this scuffle in the cockpit as the Horizon airline pilots pushed him from the flight deck. He was saying, "You have to separate me. You have to get me to safety."
Man, he just dodged a huge... Are you kidding me? He tried to crash a plane?
Yep.
And who are his lawyers? They somehow pled that down to this ridiculous misdemeanor. I don't know. I know I'm tough on law and order stuff, but man, and I know that this guy's probably a good guy with a family and stuff, but he's on mushrooms and he tried to kill a bunch of people. Sorry, man. Game over.
Not anymore. No. So it goes from 83 felony counts of attempted murder to 83 counts of reckless endangerment, which is a misdemeanor. They're already talking about getting him back to his house. A Los Angeles police officer who was allegedly stalked by former Assistant Chief Al Labrada is now suing the Los Angeles Police Department. The woman claiming retaliation and discrimination against the LAPD, the officer, and Labrada dated for more than 5 years but broke up in June. And she said that's when he started stalking her. Labrada is accused of placing an Apple AirTag tracking device on the woman's car, which was discovered in September. The officer claims her complaint against Labrada was leaked out of internal affairs, causing her to face even more harassment in this situation. In Hollywood, police are investigating after a man allegedly shot his neighbor at a home right near the Hollywood Bowl. Police say that neighbor who was shot forced his way into the other man's home on Tuesday morning and then just refused to leave. They add that the alleged trespasser was having a mental episode and before breaking into the home, shattered the back window of a Porsche. His gunshot wounds are not considered to be life-threatening. And lastly, Elon Musk, there he is, floating around with the X's there. He's making progress for X's efforts to become a banking service now. The company now has financial service licenses to operate in 12 states. It's part of Musk's vision of turning X into an everything app or a one-stop shop for banking, shopping, streaming, and networking. So at least 12 states now have banking services tied to X. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's the entrepreneurial magic of Elon Musk. He'll try to turn it into something, you know.
Yeah. This report is sponsored by Tenuta Vineyards in Livermore. And we have a special message now from Rich out at...
Happy holidays to the Mark Thompson Show. Mark, Kim, Albert, Tony, all the listeners. Tenuta Vineyards here in Livermore. Santa, that's me. I'm here every Saturday and Sunday from 1 to 3 p.m. Pictures with Santa are free. We can't thank you enough for all your support. And we just love the Mark Thompson Show. We love Mark, Kim, Albert, Tony, everybody. So just have a happy and safe holiday season. And we hope to see you out here at Tenuta. Call my friend Rich. His number is 925-699-4576. Thanks. Happy holidays.
That's very cool. Very
and when
cool.
you call Rich out at Tenuta, you say smash it with your iron rod, and you get your 10% off. So don't forget about that.
Oh, that's right.
That's
There's
right.
the number on the screen. That's
yes,
very, very cool.
925-699-4576. So go out there and do some wine tasting and have your picture taken with Santa and have a great time and get your 10% off too. Yeah.
Oh, that's really, Rich is a cool guy. Square says, that's a class act. Rich is cool. He is cool.
I'm Kim McAllister. This is The Mark Thompson Show.
They had to close down an entire radio station to silence him. And now he's here. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Thompson.
Smash it with your iron rod.
I come from regular stock.
There's a reason that this place is fun. Don't ever use that word.
What are the porn stars doing, Mark?
They pay me a lot of money for having attitude.
What you say is the political dogma that they're trying to shove down our throats.
Straight up right in, no problem.
What the hell is going on in the United States of America?
Cuatro años más.
I don't wear a mask for the same reason I don't wear underwear. Things gotta breathe.
Say what?
Do you have a secret talent?
You get nothing. Y'all can all go to hell, and I'm going back to Texas.
Out of time. Bye-bye.
Did you really just do that?
It is the holiday season. Welcome into the mix. We'll get to Rothmann in like less than 30 seconds. I do want to correct a mistake I made because very seldom do I make a mistake. As you know, I've been blessed with almost a remarkable encyclopedic knowledge and with the kind of perfection that's been studied by scientists from MIT to NIH. But apparently I have spoken in error about Norman Lloyd, the longtime actor.
Norman Lear.
Norman Lloyd, though, is
okay.
who I mentioned. Kim, don't correct me when I'm
correcting the correction.
Myself.
Okay.
Where is, and this is the other, you just don't get it, do you? You don't. And this is, I don't have that drop because my drop machines died. Dan says, sorry, Mark T., but I believe that isn't correct. Norman Lloyd, again, this is not Norman Lear. Norman Lear died, he was 101. I mentioned Norman Lloyd, man, I mentioned, oh yeah, Norman Lloyd, he was 102 when he passed away. Norman Lloyd was 106, says Dan, when he passed away, not 102. And so we checked, and Dan is correct. Dan is correct. Norman Lloyd, who was in the movie Saboteur, he was in that, which is a famous Hitchcock film, and a brilliant actor, acting all the way. I knew Norman Lloyd. He was on my old podcast. Brilliant actor and, vibrant to the end. Played tennis, I think, until he was 99. He was 106. So you were right, Dan. And again, I made a rare error. But thank you for correcting it.
Are you
now here he is.
Apologizing to the Mark Thompson Show community?
Yeah, I think we have a very smart crew.
I didn't hear a "my bad, I'm sorry." I heard nothing like that.
My bad, I'm sorry.
There you go. Yeah.
I stand corrected.
Okay, thank you.
I misspoke.
Okay,
thank you.
I got it. That's
good.
Wow. Jeez.
And I wanted to apologize to the Asian community,
guys.
the Asian American community.
Okay. Now
it was wrong,
it
was stupid, and I'm trying to be a better person.
All right. Now, to a guy who has a very popular podcast, he shared with us before the show that he has, I think, over 100,000 downloads on the show. It's called Around the Political World with John Rothmann. He is a lecturer, author, historian, and a former KGO talk show host. Here he is, John Rothmann, everybody. Hey, John.
Hey, Mark. Hey, I want you to know I'm happy to sign for you the book that I co-authored. Who knows what the value might really be in that case?
Oh, yes. That's right. I love that. And what is that book called, John?
Icon of Evil, Hitler's Mufti and the Rise of Radical Islam. And it is still selling very well, I'm delighted to say.
You may want to turn John up just a little bit, Albert. I will tell you, John, that that's an interesting story that I'd like to get into maybe another time because we have so much stuff to get into. Sure. But the relationship that you draw out in that book between the Nazis, Hitler, and factions in the Middle East. So let's get to things going on in this country first, if I can, please.
Excellent. Sure.
Yeah. Now, the news of the moment is regarding Kevin McCarthy. And I saw a comment before, sort of a comment on my comment, as McCarthy's decided to resign, prior to, his term being completely served. My point was, wow, it's a thin majority the Republicans have that's gotten even thinner. Someone said in the chat, it's a GOP district. He'll likely be replaced by a GOP congressperson. That's true. But their majority for the moment does get thinner, doesn't it?
It sure does. And McCarthy's departure is not necessarily unexpected. Unlike Nancy Pelosi, who continues to be there as a former speaker, there is precedent, as you know. John Boehner resigned his seat. We know that this is not unusual for a former speaker. So I'm not at all surprised. It does narrow the majority, and given the fact that George Santos is no longer in Congress, it does narrow the margin.
By the way, on the Santos thing, were you for getting rid of him?
Yes, I would. If I'd been a member of Congress, I would have voted to remove him.
And on the Trump removal of the name from the ballot, which doesn't appear to be happening necessarily, but I'm just curious on this removal thing, were you for that?
I've said from day one that was irresponsible and wrong. If Donald Trump is going to be removed, it should be by the voters, not by the courts.
Okay, you and I are in agreement on that. Now, to the Tommy Tuberville thing. He was blocking 400 military promotions. We've spoken about it on the show. You've spoken about it on your podcast. And I wonder if you can give me some thoughts on the fact that he's now finally relented on this. He was protesting Pentagon policy that, facilitates abortions for service members and dependents of service members. Speak to this, if you would, please.
Well, he's unblocked almost everything, but not the senior service leaders. He wants them to be approved on individual votes in the Senate. But Tuberville basically had to bow to the Republican Party. There was such opposition from Republicans in the United States Senate that I think he felt a lot of pressure. Now he can say, well, you see, I accomplished something. But in fact, Tuberville, I would say that what he did was a shameful act that hurt American national security. And that, in the end, is what Republicans in the Senate conveyed to him.
I want to speak, if I can, John, about while we're still in Congress, and then I'll get to Trump a little bit, and then we'll talk about anti-Semitism a little bit, because I think it's a intriguing and awful situation that is evolving worldwide. But while we're on the Hill, while we're in the legislatures, I wonder if you could speak to the budget and what's happening with that. I mean, this country does need to approve a budget.
Look, you have a Speaker of the House of Representatives who is not particularly strong, who is very far to the right, and we can talk more about him, the introduction to the book that he wrote, which is absolutely a disgrace. The Republicans have a severe problem. They're going to have to deal with it because what the Republicans promised was if they had the House majority, they would govern. And it is clear they have been unable to do that. So I think the Republicans are going to have to get, if you'll pardon a bad pun, their house in order. And it's going to take a real struggle to do that. I don't think Speaker Johnson, by the way, is a creditable force. And there's a lot of criticism now. You may have heard that next week, the Republicans are going to vote in the House on the impeachment of Joe Biden. And the argument is being made that only by an impeachment can you really get to the nub of all of the corruption in what is called the Biden family or the Biden crime family. My suggestion is that's really a very bad idea. It will speak well to Sean Hannity and Mark Levin and others on the far right. But to mainstream America, I don't think it flies. But that's Speaker Johnson, who announced yesterday that he felt that the impeachment resolution would come up next week. By the way, when you're in the Amazon, they wouldn't dare do it if you were in the United States of America.
John, do you think that he might suffer the same fate McCarthy suffered?
I mean, anything can happen. The Republicans are in such disarray in the House, and Liz Cheney's new book describes it. It's her story of the dysfunctionality of the Republicans. And all I can tell you is they have a problem. And if they have a problem, we have a problem. The President of the United States spoke just a few hours ago about aid to Ukraine. The Republicans are blocking aid to Ukraine. They are tying it to the southern border appropriations. It's frankly the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. By the way, that affects aid to Israel as well. The president wants a combined Ukraine-Israel package. The Republicans don't want it. It continues to get stuck in the mud, if you will. But the bottom line is the Ukrainians need our help. If we don't give it to them, the Latvians, the Estonians, the Lithuanians, the Poles, the Hungarians, the Czechs, the Slovaks, all the people who have been profoundly affected, they will remember the Republicans in the fall. And if you're talking about the Midwest, where those voting blocs have real power, the Republicans had better think about what they're doing.
Let me press you a little bit on that, John. You know, the border funds, why is that an issue? I mean, I understand the gamesmanship and the issues when you tie these two things together. I mean, supposedly this guy Johnson wants everything separated, and yet he's linked these two things. Clearly, it's political gamesmanship, right?
It's theater. It's political theater.
Okay, exactly.
So in the end.
But shouldn't there be money that should be attached to some kind of plan at the border?
Oh, there is. There's money appropriated for border security, but the Republicans don't feel border security goes far enough. I think they'd like to do what Donald Trump has suggested. Let's round them up and deport them. I mean, this is the kind of rhetoric that the Republicans are using to ignite their base, and that Donald Trump most assuredly is using to keep his supporters, throwing them red meat is what he's doing.
Well, what they'd really like to do, John, wouldn't you agree, is to do nothing, continue to use the border as a cudgel politically, and be able to, pass it on down the way. There's no real commitment to solutions at the border.
Mark,
as you say, it's a lot of grandstanding.
I am shocked. You are so cynical. It's time for a vacation, Mark. I say send them all to the Amazon with Mark Thompson.
All right, so that's what's going on Capitol Hill. Now, quickly, a moment on Trump. He's talked increasingly about, what he might do, revenge against his enemies. He wants to take revenge against the media. Bannon's spoken of revenge against the media, those who he feels are unpatriotic. And, this is a scary kind of walk that he's walking. But again, he is unapologetic. And in his conversation with Sean Hannity during this town hall event in Iowa, this is just last night, he talked about the fact that on day one of a new administration, if he gets into office, he planned to act like a dictator only on that day. After that, it's the oddest thing. Literally, the media has been focused on this and attacking you, said Hannity. Under no circumstances you are promising America tonight you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody. I'm reading this exactly as it's written. Trump said, would never abuse power as retribution against anybody. Trump, except for day one. Look, he's going crazy. Hannity, meaning, I want to close the border and I want to drill, drill, drill. Hannity quickly attempted to rein in Trump's remarks by saying, that's not retribution. And Hannity says, you're not going to be a dictator, are you? Trump replied, I said, no, 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 no. Other than day one, we're closing the border and we're drilling, drilling, drilling. After that, I'm not a dictator. I just think Trump's coming unglued, I think.
I talked about that on my podcast because while that was going on, parallel was Liz Cheney on CNN talking to Anderson Cooper. And what a contrast. What I titled my podcast this morning is A Tale of Two Americas. That's what it boils down to. And it depends on who you believe. Donald Trump is revealing what he intends to do. I worked for Richard Nixon, Mark. I know what an enemies list is, and that is precisely what Donald Trump is saying. He will weaponize the Justice Department. He will put people in charge in justice who will go after his political enemies. And if that doesn't scare the living bejeepers, even out of Trump's supporters, I don't know what will. So it's a serious question. Tonight, there will be a so-called debate. It's not a debate. It's a discussion, cattle show with the four remaining Republicans. And it'll be very interesting to see whether they decide to go after Trump. Will Nikki Haley go after him? Will Ron DeSantis go after him? Will Ramaswamy, God, I don't know. I don't care what Ramaswamy does. And there is no doubt that the former governor of New Jersey, who is the constant critic, Chris Christie, of Donald Trump, is going to hit him hard. But it'll be interesting to watch that particular broadcast. But you know the amazing thing, Mark? I don't think it's going to make any difference at all, because clearly the people who are going to vote for Trump are going to vote for Trump, and that's it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But what I heard on Sean Hannity's interview program last night was as disturbing as anything could be. And I must tell you, I cannot imagine anyone with a grain of sense voting for someone who would make the kinds of statements that Donald Trump has made. It's just mind-boggling and very disturbing, frankly. When Joe Biden says it's a struggle for democracies, he's right. And I should make a note of his comment yesterday that he is really running to stop Donald Trump. He believes he can beat Donald Trump. Although as he was walking out, somebody asked him, "Are you the only one who can beat Donald Trump?" He said, "No, but I'm going to beat Donald Trump." And I think that's the key.
Well, he clearly feels, and as you say, he just sort of freshly articulated the fact that he feels he's the guy to do it again, in effect, even as his poll numbers lag. Let me ask you about, just because of our limited time, the White House now, just today, is coming out along with members of Congress scolding the presidents of Harvard, UPenn, MIT, for their responses in these hearings about anti-Semitism on their campus and at their universities. All the presidents were asked if a call for the genocide of Jewish people would be considered harassment under the campus policies as they sit at those universities I just mentioned. And none of the trio answered the question. They all said it would need to be investigated by the school and depend on the context and how pervasive the calls were. The White House said it's unbelievable that this needs to be said. Calls for genocide are monstrous and antithetical to everything we represent as a country. Any statements that advocate for the systematic murder of Jews are dangerous and revolting, and we should all stand firmly against them on the side of human dignity and the most basic values that unite us as Americans. It's remarkable, though, John, that this conversation even has to be had.
Well, you and I have talked about this. Kim has been included in that conversation. I know that some people viewed my statements to you about this problem as being somewhat extreme or overreaction. I just want to indicate it's not an overreaction. It is completely valid. But what is happening on college campuses today, and the fact that these university presidents, leaders in the education community, refused to say the words that needed to be said, should shock and disturb every American. And if you wonder why Jews in America, and I include myself in that number, are worried about the security of our community, the community of Jews, whether it's synagogues or Jewish community centers, wherever it may be. You heard what happened up in Mercer Island in Washington. I know you have listeners from Mercer Island. Their synagogue was desecrated with the most obscene Jew-hating rhetoric. And this is now becoming a phenomenon that is real. May I tell you quickly this? I had an email yesterday from a very dear friend whose father was the chairman of the Democratic Party here in California. I've known her for years. One of her sons is on President Biden's staff. For the first time in her life, she recounted in the email to me that she did not admit to being a Jew when she was confronted because she was afraid. And let me tell you, she is a fearless individual. And that tells you everything. When you have people saying, take off your Stars of David, take the mezuzah off your door, don't wear a yarmulke, out of fear. And I know we don't have time to do it, Take a look at what happened in Oakland. Take a look at what happened in Hayward at the city council meetings. Take a look at what happened yesterday at the Board of Supervisors here in the city and county of San Francisco. And you understand the fear and the anger and the frustration that is now evident in the Jewish community. I've quoted Eric Hoffer to you before, but that great longshoreman philosopher said the problem of the world is they expect the Jews to be the only real Christians in the world. And that's not going to happen in this case. And the fact that it's acknowledged by members of the Senate, by members of the House, by the President of the United States, and by public officials throughout the country should be alarming to every single individual, Jew and Gentile. Somebody pointed out to me, if Jesus were alive today, remember, he was a nice Jewish boy.
Well, I just want to go back to what you just were talking about, because I think it's interesting and I wanted to ask you about it. I mean, this in the Bay Area, you know, this show was born out of the Bay Area, and Bay Area radio came to YouTube, and now we have an audience that extends beyond that. But I still pay a lot of attention to what's going on in the Bay Area, of course. And the Richmond City Council meeting to debate the merits of this resolution calling for a ceasefire. You mentioned, you know, Hayward, Richmond, et cetera. These are all cities in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm wondering why cities and various city councils, it's not just the Bay Area, it's happening nationwide, feel the need to take this stuff up to begin with, especially cities with so many problems. I mean, you've got a lawlessness, homelessness, all of these things that are, you know, ongoing issues, stubborn issues in cities that really require immediate attention, and yet you're taking up the Middle East situation. It seems like it's a virtue signaling or some crap along those lines.
Oh, it's votes. It's votes. If you have communities with large Arab and Muslim communities, and yes, large Jewish communities, you have to be aware of what your constituents want. And if I've been an activist, as you know, on the local level, state level, national level, for many, many years, it is not unusual. This has happened before. Many of you will recall the anti-Israel measures which were on the ballot in Berkeley and in San Francisco back in the 1970s and 80s. So this is not new. I had an email this morning from a buddy of mine who lives in Massachusetts, and actually the city council declined to put this on the ballot or have this discussed. But that's few and far between. So all I can tell you is it is a growing phenomenon. And if I, as a political activist, understand that you can make a national issue or an international issue a local issue and garner votes, people do that. I want to remind you, in Michigan, which was a very closely decided in the last presidential election, that Joe Biden carried Michigan very narrowly. And one of the reasons he carried that community, that state, was because of the Muslim vote. The Muslims would not vote for Donald Trump, who wanted to do a Muslim ban, if you remember, in the opening days of his administration. Well,
John,
now there's a problem because Biden is so pro-Israel. So, you know, there's an ambivalence.
I want to double back to two things.
Sure.
You're right about Arab constituencies or constituencies that might respond to these to things being brought up before the city council. Will you help remind me and everyone, is the San Francisco City Council similarly made up of those who have to handle those constituencies? I didn't realize there was this massive Palestinian, Arab, whatever community.
San Francisco is made up of a board of supervisors. It's the only city and county in California. And it's 11 districts. So each supervisor represents a district. I, by the way, would go back to citywide elections. I think it's much better, but we've got districts and there are organized forces. Let me remind you, it's just not Arab and Muslim community. It's left of center activists.
That's what's going on. And
Democratic,
that's what I wanted
socialists,
to get to.
and so forth.
Thank you.
And look, I was very close to Bayard Rustin, who was one of the leaders of the social democrats in America. He and I worked together on many projects. And Bayard, who organized the Civil Rights March in Washington in 1963 for Martin Luther King Jr., and who was gay, so everybody knows that was one of the problems that Bayard had in those days, he was avidly pro-Israel. When the United Nations passed a resolution equating Zionism with racism on November 10th, 1975, Bayard Rustin fired back with an article, Why I'm a Zionist. And one of the moments that I had and shared with him was at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. in 1982, in the summer of 82. And he said to me, I will always stand with Israel, John. I'm a black man who understands what persecution is. So this is something that is a phenomenon. But may I just say, so everybody understands this is not the paranoia of John Rothmann. This is a genuine fear based on fact, which can be heard among Jews and the Jewish community throughout the United States and, yes, Europe as well. The virus, may I describe it this way? I described it this way the other night in a talk I gave for the first time. It just came to me in the middle of the talk. It's like shingles. It's like shingles. Jew hatred is part of the fabric of many, but on occasion, it emerges with all of the vituperative language and hate that we now experience. And unfortunately, there is a vaccine against shingles. There is no vaccine against Jew hatred.
John, in our, but I'm going to just go back to the fact that in San Francisco, hey, guys, all you soups or whatever, you have got big issues in San Francisco. Big, okay? Massive issues. The city is losing conference business. The city is losing tourist business. The city is losing the luster of this magical place, San Francisco, that I love. And that you are taking up in your city council this crap about, what does it have to do with San Francisco would be the question I have. And I would feel the same way if you were voting for Israel, against Israel. I don't care. What the hell are you doing talking about the Middle East? You guys, there are people shooting up and urinating publicly on the streets of San Francisco. Clean it up.
I agree with you, but I also understand the practical realities. Whether it was the civil rights movement, whether it was the war in Vietnam, whether it was the Iraq War, local, and I'm just using those as examples, the San Francisco community, the Board of Supervisors, inevitably takes a stand. I have to tell you, it's not that I object to their taking positions as individuals, or even if they wanted to pass a resolution. But when you see the virulence, the vituperation, the hatred that is expressed, let me remind you, I don't know if I told you this story. When our oldest son Samuel was a little boy, I used to take him to all the demonstrations, pro, anti, and we went to a pro-Palestinian demonstration. And the chant was, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. The presidents of universities were asked about that. Let me explain to you. Samuel looked at me and said, what does that mean? I said, the river is the Jordan River. The sea is the Mediterranean Sea. And what's in between is Israel. And my little boy in those days looked at me and said, well, they're talking about the destruction of Israel, aren't they? And I said, you bet they are. And that's the lesson. There has to be a recognition that this kind of hatred, which manifests itself in this way, go to any Jewish community center, go to any synagogue, and you will see police presence these days because Jews feel we are under siege. And may I say, if we are under siege, so is democracy.
I just want to mention that Berkeley is being sued for anti-Semitism and the unchecked spread of anti-Semitism. I have no more time. I've got to wrap.
Well, wait, you can't leave yet. You know, I have a reason for saying this. I want to wish Mark Godspeed on his trip to the Amazon. I am reminded of the cartoon of Theodore Roosevelt visiting the Amazon and all the animals running the other way for fear of Theodore Roosevelt.
Well, Theodore Roosevelt, they should run the other way. He was shooting everything that moved.
Maybe you guys can find it. It's online. You can.
Theodore Roosevelt killed more animals than the entire state of Kentucky kills in a year.
May I say, I don't want to horn in on anyone's
how
territory,
dare you.
But Mark Thompson, have a great time, and I will be thinking of you as the image of that cartoon. And may the animals all be blessed by your presence.
Thank you. Around the Political World with John Rothmann. John Rothmann, everybody. Bye, John Rothmann. Yeah. We are running a taste late. It's because we have so much
The Mark Thompson Show
content. Kim, did you have something before we continue? You have to unmute if you do have anything you want to say, but if not, then you can remain muted.
No, it's just been on my mind. Earlier, I was called onto the carpet for wanting to protect free speech in America versus the what's being said on college campuses making Jewish people feel unsafe. And so I wanted to ask John about that, but maybe David Katz can weigh in on the legalities of what free speech is in America, what you can say, what you can't. But
I like it. All right, we'll get to it.
The Mark Thompson Show.
If you have not yet, I will encourage you to smash the like button like a boss. Costs you nothing.
Iron rod.
This is my last show for the year. Kim will be here. As I say, we have conversations and content that I will leave behind, some great conversations. And one of the great conversations that will continue is the one that we'll have every Thursday every Thursday is when we talk to David Katz normally. This week, he's moved up his conversation with us to Wednesday because he's traveling as well. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I guess what I'm trying to say is all these conversations will continue. We'll have live shows every day except for Christmas Day and for New Year's Day. Isn't that right? I think
That's
otherwise
correct.
we're on the air all the time. So thanks to Kim in advance for that. All right, here he is.
Sucker.
Sayonara, sucker. The former federal prosecutor, now the great defense attorney, and he is on London radio, on Fox News Channel, on local channels in New York. He's on Fox 5 in New York, on their morning show in Los Angeles. And he's so good to give us a little bit of his time. He such a great mind on the law. David Katz, everyone. Hi, David.
Great to be with you guys.
David, what about this idea somehow that Kim, we'll start with Kim's question. Kim, you want to jump back on and you can ask David about this, the limits of speech on campuses and the scourge of anti-Semitism as it's played out. There's an actual, and you'll appreciate this, David, didn't you go to Berkeley?
I did.
Berkeley Law.
Yeah. There's college too.
And there's a lawsuit being brought now against Berkeley for anti-Semitism, for alleged long-standing, unchecked spread of anti-Semitism at the school at UC Berkeley.
People can say vile things and hateful things and awful things, and that's allowed in America because you can say things, but until it rises to the level of a crime or it crosses over into some type of physical violence or physical harm, then we've got a problem. But how do you balance the need for people to feel safe, especially right now, Jewish students who don't feel safe on campuses versus the right for people to get out there and protest and say what they feel they need to say?
Well, legally, Kim, you can't make an actual threat. And you also can't do certain things. There are limitations on your First Amendment rights. Everyone knows you can't scream fire in a crowded theater. Well, you can't, disrupt a meeting or disrupt a class in a way that, by threatening violence, by hitting the fire alarm, you can't, there's fighting words. You can't issue fighting words. And in some instances, these may amount to fighting words, these things where they start screaming at each other, and it may constitute fighting words to the point that you almost have self-defense. Of course, in my opinion, you should always retreat. You should always try to find some way where you don't actually get into any kind of a physical fight. That just doesn't make sense. The Berkeley lawsuit, my understanding is a lot of it is over discovery and records. They want records of internal emails and things like that, which they claim that Berkeley has stonewalled. So their case starts with getting the discovery. Berkeley says there's thousands of emails that have to do with our policy toward these allegedly anti-Semitic demonstrations that have been allowed to go on. And the response by the plaintiffs is, really, there's thousands of emails and that's why it's burdensome for you to produce them? If there's thousands of emails, that's part of our narrative.
Sure.
We want those thousands of emails. What people are writing thousands of emails to condone or be apologists for these anti-Semitic demonstrations. But generally, my feeling is that, no snowflakes. People are old enough to, volunteer for the military. They're old enough to vote. They're old enough to sustain a heated conversation on both sides. And the idea of being a snowflake, I always laugh about it when they say Berkeley students are snowflakes. They say, well, Republican candidates are snowflakes. You're in that. You mentioned Teddy Roosevelt before, right? There's a lot of things to not like about Teddy Roosevelt, but this idea of a vigorous discourse, the idea of a debate, including a debate that can get heated, and looking at both sides of the question. That's the idea, of a liberal, small L, liberal education, of seeing both sides of it, of arguing both sides. One of the things that I loved about moot court and law school was you show up with these positions all mapped out, and you're going to say this and say that. And the best moot court is that 10 minutes before the argument, they say, okay, argue the other side. And it seems that's part of being an advocate. That's part of being an attorney. This idea, you see people come on TV and there's a chyron at the bottom that says, practice restricted to the innocent, only defends victims. First of all, how do you know somebody's a victim before you start out and fully, that's for the jury to decide, right, whether somebody's a victim or not. And so all of this sort of, to me, there's an awful lot of posturing, an awful lot of that goes on. Having said all of that, I've read Dean Chemerinsky's editorial, who said, I am the biggest advocate of free speech ever. And yet what I've seen at Berkeley and some of these other campuses like Cornell, some of the other ones, it's just too much already. I mean, people just screaming at you are obviously fighting words, calling you all kinds of names. That is not furthering the debate, calling people all kinds of slurs and names. So I haven't really answered your question, but those are my thoughts, Mark.
Well, no, that's actually interesting. And Chemerinsky, I'll remind everybody, is the dean of the law school at Berkeley. The idea then, though, in your last comment there, that when you get to slinging enough of this, you're saying, even Chemerinsky is saying, well, that's not furthering speech, and there should be some kind of, it sounds like he's saying not there shouldn't be a legal limit, but there could be a campus policy on it. Is that what he's saying?
Well, I think there are right now campus policies. And one of the things is to avoid these snowflake arguments so that there are these safe zones. Some of the schools have resegregated. It just seems to me that resegregation along racial, ethnic, political lines is not healthy. And I know that there's all kinds of natural tendencies. I said to someone I know who went to Berkeley, and is a very distinguished lawyer, she just won an award here. I said, so what was it like, you an undergrad, you at one of those fancy Ivy League schools? And she said it was great. The education we got was great, but we Black students pretty much stuck together. Maybe that was the era, maybe that was us, but we were not an integrated class in college. We were in law school. And it just seems to me that, I'm a huge idealist. Everyone should get along. Everyone should enjoy the diversity. They should, to have a diverse campus, but that in fact is sort of resegregated along any kind of lines is unfortunate. I know that those things happen. So,
yeah, it's funny. I also think that these diverse communities, it might be a college campus, it might just be a dining room table. It might be a table at Starbucks or whatever. I think the more diversity in your life, it enriches the experience so much, So I share, and at the same time, that notion in my head coexists with this awful fact, which is that we're tribal. As a species, we are tribal. And so the tribalism goes from family to neighborhood to skin color to religion. We have all these ways to divide our different tribes. Even you can look at about the Muslims. It's not all Muslims. There's Shiite Muslims. There's the Sunnis. Within Christianity, there the Protestants. Within Judaism, they're the Hasidic Jews. It's a very bizarre fact, I suspect, as I come around to every year realizing that we are just tribal, and our attempts to stamp out the tribalism just are ill-fated.
Mark, can I just say one thing? I was a student of foreign languages, among other things, and I'm quite bilingual in Spanish, and I wanted my Spanish to be really excellent, especially when I was an undergrad. So I went to Spain. I'd studied in Mexico while I was in high school. I did one of these years, a summer abroad in Mexico, 1968, just before the Olympics. And it was with the Friends of Mexico. President Obama sent one of his daughters to the same program years later. And it was a wonderful total immersion into Spanish. And then during college at Berkeley, I went and spent a summer in Spain. But because of that interest in a foreign language, I met a lot of people from different cultures. I met a lot of people who are Catholics. My friends always make fun of me because part of learning Spanish, you learn all the parts of the church. You meet all these Jesuits. I learned some Latin. A Jesuit priest said to me in Franco era Spain, He said, this is what's happened to the world today. The only people who know Latin are the Jews. I thought that was pretty funny. Solamente los judíos hablan latín, estudian latín. So, I just recommend to people to do whatever they can to try to really have a diverse experience. Learn a foreign language, learn a foreign culture. I think that really does increase it's so easy for us to sort of stay home. I saw a scholar the other day who had learned Mandarin Chinese. And someone said, my God, at your age, how do you possibly learn Mandarin Chinese? He said, I just turned off the NFL. The time I used to watch NFL football, I learned Mandarin Chinese, spoken and written. So
let me tell you, just last night at the dining room table, we were discussing what the most difficult language to learn is. And I maintain it's Chinese, because every character, if you just go up in inflection at the end of the character, it totally changes the word's meaning. So it's very funny that you mentioned Mandarin, because I view that as an unbreakable code if you're an adult. I mean, if you're a child, you can learn, your mind is built that way. Your brain is built to absorb languages. But as an adult, I get mad respect. And the fact that the NFL stole so much time from that guy's life that by giving it up, he was able to do it is remarkable. Because you speak Spanish, I'm going to ask you to translate my predicament as I go to Ecuador, Guatemala, Chile, and Peru beginning tomorrow. Puedo hablar, pero no entiendo nada. Tell everyone what I just said.
You speak, but you don't understand everything.
That's exactly
Mark, with your excellent pronunciation, which you just showed in pronouncing the countries correctly, and because you have this great voice and you speak so well, people are going to think that you understand everything, because if you can speak as well as you do, so they're going to start, say despacio.
Yes, despacio, por favor. Yeah.
Más lento, despacio, and
Más
maybe
lento.
you'll have luck that people will slow down to a pace that you'll grasp.
That's manageable.
What they're saying.
All right.
A lot of things are translated, and of course, a lot of people speak English, especially if you're in a tourist place.
Sure.
That's
I'd like to mejorar my Spanish. I'd like to improve my Spanish, but I'm we'll see. Now
you may get one Spanish language credit just for watching the program today, Mark.
Okay, now let's talk about Senor Rudy Giuliani. Okay, he skipped out on this court hearing yesterday. This is ahead of his defamation trial. So the judge was angry about that. Can you speak to the realities of the repercussions of doing something like that if you're Giuliani?
Well, if you defy a court's order in a criminal case, you're very likely to have your bond revoked and find yourself not out on bail, but awaiting a criminal trial in custody. So one of the things as a white-collar criminal defense attorney, I'm always admonishing my clients to be very, very careful and, of course, strictly obey all the court orders. And if you have any issue about whether you should be there or not, because sometimes your lawyer can appear for you. But if you have any issue about whether you're complying with the court order, make sure that you're complying. In a civil case, if you don't show up for a deposition, they can comment on that. They can use that against you in the civil case. But I'm not entirely familiar with Giuliani's situation because I've been preparing on Purdue Pharma.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. This just crossed, so I wanted to it doesn't look like there are going to be any real repercussions. The attorneys for Giuliani were yelled at by the judge, but it does. But so this is again the defamation trial. So we'll see. But again, Howell, who was the judge in this case, I believe, has already ruled that Giuliani is civilly liable on the plaintiff's defamation, and so we'll see how this all plays out. But that was his latest bit of brinksmanship, was to not show up for this pre-trial. He didn't want to confront his accusers, apparently, and the judge was irritated, but it doesn't look like there are any other repercussions. And as you say, since it's not a criminal trial, I guess he gets away with it.
You can be held in contempt even in a civil case. If in the middle of your civil case you just start insulting the judge, swearing at the judge, something like that, you would be in criminal contempt because you did something in a courtroom, civil or criminal. But I can't go much more into depth into Giuliani's case. Before we get into the Pharma case, can I just say, because I haven't had a chance on your show to acknowledge Sandra Day O'Connor. And she truly was a giant. I mean, she was a trailblazer. And I've been working for years with another attorney who actually was her law clerk under very interesting circumstances. He was either the first or very near the first. And if I can just tell the story for a minute in honor of the truly great Sandra Day O'Connor. She was picked about a year into President Reagan's term. And her ascension to the U.S. Supreme Court was made possible by the resignation of a judge named Potter Stewart, who was one of these old guard. You don't hear his name very often, but he was one of those truly conservative, in the best sense of the word, follow precedent, always, interested in his take on a case because it was always so thoughtful. And this very thoughtful, conservative in the best sense judge resigned, and that made possible Sandra Day O'Connor going on the court. And the Washington Post said at the time, it's very dated, but that Potter Stewart was such a gentleman, he gave up his seat for a lady. That was considered very clever. I know, very dated by now. And the whole country was fascinated. And one of the fascinated people was my best friend, who was going to be the law clerk selected by Potter Stewart. Was he then going to be selected by Sandra Day O'Connor? She didn't have to keep Potter Stewart's law clerks. They'd been selected by him. Well, anyway, it had a very happy ending for the country. We had Sandra Day O'Connor. She was confirmed, and she kept my friend as one of her very first law clerks. The law clerkship is for a year. And of course, she became a real trailblazer. And I mean, I don't need to tell you or Kim especially, but was a huge example for women to follow in her footsteps, to become lawyers, to become judges. Now it's so normal to have women on the Supreme Court, women on the state Supreme Courts around the country, women in very high positions, prominent positions. But it was a thing then, and she really was a trailblazer. Her famous decision in Casey versus Planned Parenthood, 5-4, she cast a decisive vote to keep Roe v. Wade alive. It turned out only for another 20 years, but to keep it alive at the time, and it seemed like it was very much. And then the people who don't think that she was so great do remember her casting the 5th vote in Bush v. Gore. And I always thought she should have known better, and she should have stayed out of that one. But she did cast the 5th vote that allowed that stopped the count, and that crowned Bush. As people said, Bush won the only vote that mattered in 2000, the 5-4 vote of the U.S. Supreme Court, and that was her decisive vote for Bush in that one. But I think her whole legacy was really terrific. And you look at what the Supreme Court's done since, and she was just really one of the great ones. So I wanted to give that shout out, and then on to the Pharma case, if we can.
Yeah, I mean, that's so well cast, the history of Sandra Day O'Connor in every way, the controversial way and also the historic way. So let's get into this Purdue Pharma thing. There is a deal struck, and now that deal could be in question?
I think, what am I, 17-0? So this may be 17-1, because I am really struggling. Yeah. I'm really struggling to figure out how this case is going to come out. Not how it should come out, not how I want it to come out, which I'm not entirely sure of. There's an editorial, by the way, in today's LA Times, which is worth reading if people want to see it. It's called, "Has the Sackler Family That Gave Us the Opioid Crisis Suffered Enough?" Well, if you look at it that way, no, they haven't suffered enough. They haven't paid enough. But they're willing to pay $6 billion. And so the Supreme Court is really wrestling with the fact that if they undo this settlement, the Sacklers will fight this like hell, which they've been doing for over a decade. And this is not whether they go to jail or not. The Sacklers are not going to jail, no matter what their role was, no matter how awful it was in this opioid crisis, and how much families and communities have had to suffer with this opioid crisis. That's not what the issue is. The issue is it's a little complicated, and I think Kagan on the Supreme Court kind of summed it up. But if you step back from it, there was no criminal prosecution. This all happened about 2007, 2008, and only the company was prosecutor, or a holding company for the Purdue Pharma was ever prosecuted in this case. And then these civil lawsuits started against the Sackler family. They're supposed to be worth billions and billions of dollars. And so one view of it, and this is the view that the liberal states took, Mark, was that they should be sued until the cows come home. They should be sued forever. Full accountability means full accountability. And if your family's worth 12 or 14 billion dollars and you only bring 6 billion to the table, how is that full accountability? But the other side of it is they brought 6 billion to the table, and these cities need it, and these Native American tribes need it, and the individuals need it, and 97% of the people supposedly who are interested in it think it's okay. 3% don't think it's okay, and the 3% who don't think it's okay are the ones that are saying, look, the Sacklers still have money and we want to go after them. Who's to say we're not going to get more money when we go after them? But the Supreme Court is thinking if this whole thing comes asunder, and in the name of principle, we throw out all of this money, and it doesn't work out according to principle. The Sacklers fight and fight and fight, and these communities that want the money, these individuals that have fought so hard for the money, these Native American tribes, suppose they get bupkis, suppose they get 1 billion and not 6. They don't end up getting the 10 or 12. They don't get the 6, and they don't even get a less than 6.
It is a roll of the dice. Yeah, and so again, just to remind everyone, and again, just to reiterate, it's a deal that was made. The Sackler family, as you suggested, wildly wealthy, said, we'll break off. Was the number $6 billion? Yes, $6 billion. And that will address the opioid crisis that we helped create, or whatever. I don't know if they put in the we helped create part. And will also have nothing to do with the company anymore. Isn't that right, David? I think they divested themselves from Purdue. So
from the point of view of the plaintiffs and the conservative states that pushed for this settlement, and they line up Democratic, Republican, they line up the conservative states, accepted it pretty much not from the outset. Like I said, the Sacklers fought for years and years to not pay a penny and to fight every one of these civil lawsuits. But the conservative states were the ones that first went for it, and then Massachusetts, New York, California kept fighting, saying, throw in more, throw in more. I don't get through all the details, but eventually...
And again, that allowed them to then now no longer have any liability. That's the point. We're giving you this money. We admit to it. We'll have nothing more to do with the company. Now take this money and use it in your communities and rebuild them for the damage done by the opioid crisis. And you're suggesting that there's a small percentage of people, and now this is my question, when you say the 3% feel like, hey, no, there's more money here and they ought to pay more, they did more damage than $6 billion. How much of that is driven by the legal profession in this, and how much of this is done by, grievance that can be called more legitimate?
A lot of it is the plaintiff's bar, but it's not easy to win these cases. I had a case against the Los Angeles Police Department. We ended up winning almost $2 million. It was so much work. It was such a hassle. You don't really make that much per hour as people think when you add up the whole number of hours, the experts you pay, the Medicaid payment that you have to make. But we won. And even having won, I just decided that unless I saw a case with that great facts again, I wasn't that interested in being a plaintiff's lawyer myself, even though I had a case and I won. And I admire these folks, men and women who take these cases. But yes, they take them on a contingency. And yes, it would be a disaster for the lawyers who put the money in and the experts who put the money in, because they would lose their 1/3 or 40% recovery. It would also be bad for their clients who are getting the 60 or 67% of that money. Yes, the plaintiff's lawyers are getting 33%. And then you have all of these cities, and the cities are trying to deal with the aftermath of the opioid crisis. They're trying to, have centers, they're trying to do treatment, they're trying to do all that. And the cities would be out the money unless they figure out a way to get the money from somewhere else. Now, you could say, well, why doesn't the government just say, you know what, we'll pay that money. We'll pay some billions of dollars. Throw it out, which is what the government says. I mean, it's admirable of the Biden administration, because the Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of this settlement. And there was nobody to protest it, really, who had standing except the U.S. trustee. The U.S. trustee in bankruptcy has a duty, Mark, to make sure that the bankruptcy process is fair. And they took it to the Supreme Court, and they got the Supreme Court to take cert on the case. This one turns out to not be that ideological. And people like Justice Kagan are trying to figure out what she wants to do. There's also a block of the court. I think Amy Coney Barrett she's one of them. She likens this case to the Boy Scouts and the Catholic Church, because the Boy Scouts and the Catholic Church have made deals like this too. We're putting this much money on the table, and then we're going to go back to being the Catholic Church, and we're going to go back to being the Boy Scouts, and you're going to not sue us anymore, and you're going to not sue individuals anymore. And the anomaly of all of this, Mark, is that this is being done through the bankruptcy courts. This is because Purdue Pharma went to the bankruptcy court and they said, okay, here's our reorganization plan. This family, the Sacklers, are going to get out of it. We're going to have this turnaround expert in charge of it. We're going to become a good organization. We're going to just do good things. We're not going to sell opioids anymore, they said. And we're going to have the Sackler family throw, at that time, $4 billion on the table. Ultimately, with all the problems, all the people screaming, they threw $6 billion on the table, and that was the final settlement. The Sacklers themselves, Mark, never went to bankruptcy court. They are not themselves bankrupt. If they're worth $10 billion, they're worth $10 billion. And if this settlement stands, nobody can sue them. That's why it sort of violates principle. It's money against principle. But the money is so strong because there's going to be $6 billion to pay victims. And yes, some of it's going to go to lawyers, but there's going to be the overwhelming amount of it to pay victims and to do, remediation. And so do you throw out the baby with the bathwater? And then, for instance, Justice Alito said, well, you can't really get this money out of him anyway, because they sent so much of it offshore, and it's sitting offshore in the name of the individual Sacklers or people in trust for them, in spendthrift trusts. I mean, Mark, I can never believe Alito, when he wants to go in a certain direction, suddenly there's all these problems in the world. If this was some cartel guy, and the argument was, well, don't get any more money out of the cartel guy because the money it's offshore and it's in a spendthrift trust, they would say prosecute him to the end of the earth, wouldn't they? I mean, civilly prosecute him to the end of the earth. Make sure the guy doesn't get a passport. Make it difficult for him to travel into the United States. Take it into a civil court, Mark, and have the judge there order that person to break that spendthrift trust and to spend the money back. They've done that with money offshore, Mark, and they have the person held in contempt, in civil contempt, and they say, you're going to jail until you pay that money, right? That's my order. You're not a criminal, but my order is that you break that spendthrift trust and you send $1 billion back into the country. The guy says, I'm not going to do it. They say, well, until you do it, you have the keys to the jailhouse door in your hand, but you're going to jail until you do my order. That's been done over and over again. But suddenly that can't be done with these folks. Having said all of that, all of those principled things, I think on balance, because you have Amy Coney Barrett, I think, is going to vote for the settlement. Kavanaugh, from his question, said 97% are for this because it gets them prompt payment. You've been doing this for 30 years. But the fact that they've been doing this for 30 years, Mark, doesn't change the fact that it is a blueprint to get away with massive fraud. There is no reason why anyone who commits a mass tort wouldn't try to set this thing up. You get nothing from the individuals who did the mass tort. You did nothing from the environmental polluters. You could even think of someone like Trump. Wouldn't Trump love this deal? He probably called his lawyers and said, how come you idiots aren't like Roy Cohn? How come you idiots haven't thought of this? This one and that one, they'll go bankrupt. And the agreement will be that Trump will not be sued by anybody civilly because, the Trump organization, this one, that one, they went bankrupt. They put $1 billion on the table for whatever remediation is that you guys want. And then Trump is never in bankruptcy. Like the Sacklers are never in bankruptcy. So, Mark, they haven't inquired of them, how much are you worth? They can't even take their deposition in bankruptcy court and say, how much are you worth? If you're really worth only another $1 billion, maybe $6 billion makes sense. Suppose you're worth another $20 billion. You're worth $20 billion. Maybe the documents would have shown if they'd individually gone into bankruptcy, they have $20 billion. No, 6 doesn't make much sense, does it, if the Sackler family walked away with $20 billion? But we don't know that because they themselves are never in bankruptcy. So the principled argument is, how do you get the benefit of the bankruptcy order if you yourself are never in bankruptcy? This is like a third-party windfall to the person who caused the opioid damage in the first place.
This
what
is
a tough case.
Yeah, very tough one.
Remarkable. There's lots of dead people involved who were memorialized in the placards outside of the U.S. Supreme Court. My son would have liked to know his father, placards.
So
like
what
that.
is Katz's final position on this case? We only have 30 seconds. Go ahead.
they will affirm it, and they will issue strict rules to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again. They'll say that the bankruptcy judges and other judges should scrutinize it very carefully. They'll limit it in certain ways. If the only thing that would make the deal fly was, let's say, getting somebody out of jail, if you give the person civil liability, and oh, by the way, they don't get prosecuted at all, that's the deal that, let's say, Trump would want. That's too far. That's too far. But the statute had already run because they didn't murder anybody, no matter what your view of it is. And it's awful what happened, in my view, but they didn't murder anybody. So the statute of limitations has run, Mark, criminally. But if you wanted to stop the statute of limitations on somebody, that would be too far. But in certain circumstances, apparently, yes, these mass tort feasors can do something like what the Sackler family did, and the Sackler family or people like them in the future can walk away with a big chunk of change and never be scrutinized in the bankruptcy court.
Yeah.
You throw out the $6 billion. You're on the court, Mark. You throw out the $6 billion.
I throw it out. Yes, I throw it out. I throw it out. Absolutely. Okay. It's a horrible precedent. Absolutely horrible precedent for all the reasons you've articulated. There is Katz as illustrated by one of our viewers. And David, love you. Un placer. Mucho gusto en verte otra vez. You know, a lot of fun seeing you again.
El gusto es mío. Que te vaya bien en Sudamérica.
Oh, well done. Well done. He says the pleasure is mine, and have a good trip in South America. Bye-bye, David Katz.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Well, I've kept our next guest waiting. I hope he's still there. Cory Doctorow is a terrific best-selling author, and his latest book is called The Lost Cause. It's a novel of truth and reconciliation in our polarized future. Please welcome. He's one of our favorite guests, and I've already insulted him by making him wait so long, but we had to get that on, and we've just been running late all day. Cory Doctorow, everybody. Hi, Cory.
Hi. I'm not insulted in the slightest. That is a very interesting subject.
David is a marvelous mind on the law, as you can tell, and it's just such a luxury to have him. But you're a marvelous.
I just have an airport run to make to get home here from North Carolina. So
I'm so sorry. So your book, The Lost Cause, takes place in the, you would call it near future, like 30 years in the future?
Yeah, something like that. That's right.
And tell us about that time and then what happens.
Sure. So, you know, at this moment, I think one of the most terrifying things about the climate emergency is not just that we can foresee it, that it's coming at us, but that we don't seem to be doing anything with that foresight. You know, it's like we're all trapped in the back of a bus that is barreling towards a cliff. And, you know, we're shouting at the people up in first class, hey, there's a cliff coming. And they're like, there's no cliff. And if there is a cliff, maybe if we're going fast enough, we'll go over the cliff. And even if that doesn't happen, we'll figure out how to put wings on the bus by the time we get to the edge of the cliff. And, you know, as the cliff is getting closer and closer, we're saying, like, grab the wheel, swerve. And they're like, swerve, the bus could roll and someone could break a leg. We can't do that. And so this is a book set after the swerve. This is a book set after a moment where we take the climate emergency in hand and treat it with the gravitas and the urgency it deserves. And so you have millions of young people all over the world devoting themselves to doing things like moving whole coastal cities, like inland and uphill. And you have big projects to solarize, weatherize, build incredible power generation and storage. You know, my colleague Deb Chakra, the material scientist, in her new book, How Infrastructure Works, she writes about the fact that you could give everyone in the world the energy budget of an American with 0.4% of the sunshine that reaches the Earth's surface. So it's about getting our materials lined up right for an abundant future that's safe again. But there are some people for whom this is not good news, right? There are some people for whom this is all a disaster. There was no cliff. There was never going to be a cliff. We could have gone over the cliff. We could have put wings on the bus. And for those people who in this book are kind of two tribes, one are these anarcho-capitalist billionaire wreckers who are in a seagoing fleet traversing the Pacific Ocean of old aircraft carriers and luxury ships and cruise ships and super yachts, trying to convince people to use Bitcoin. And then there's their useful idiots, the turkeys who are here to vote for Christmas, white nationalist militias and MAGA hats. And for them, this is a disaster. And so this is about what happens when the people who are today fighting the status quo, trying to build a new world, one where we really try to build a climate-ready future, cease being the attackers, trying to change the status quo and become the defenders, trying to keep things from changing back, and about how deadly and dangerous that all is. It makes for quite a cracking yarn. Kim Stanley Robinson and Rebecca Solnit both loved it. Naomi Klein loves it.
Oh, you've gotten great
Given,
reviews,
350.org,
terrific
calls it
reviews.
The first-rate Yimby novel, which is very exciting.
Yeah, you've gotten terrific reviews. It's really remarkable. And, you know this world of science so well. I'll remind everybody, I think you're I want to say a visiting associate at MIT, and your computer science background is pretty vast. So I think you bring all those X's and O's to this situation. So I'm sure that this is quite believable in terms of I think your books and your stories have such credibility, even as you give them a world. And so this as well. And let's face it, I mean, this is not only credible, this is our dilemma right now.
Sure. And, I think that we spend a lot of time sort of mired in the paralysis of not being able to even imagine a better future. I think that a lot of the project of the right since the Reagan era has been to make us stop imagining things. When you think about Margaret Thatcher and her aphorism, there is no alternative, what she's really trying to do is get us to stop trying to think of alternatives. I'm a science fiction writer. I can think of 6 alternatives before breakfast. And so once you start thinking about those alternatives, once you start realizing that maybe this isn't what we do, but there are things we can do, that we're not helpless, we're not hopeless, we don't have to sit and wait for the bus to go over the cliff. We can grab the wheel and swerve. Then it changes the game. It changes the way we think about things. And we are at this inflection point. Anything that can't go on forever eventually stops. People are self-radicalizing about the climate because things are on fire, or things are flooding, or there are zoonotic plagues who are locking them indoors for 3 years at a time. And we are finally getting to the point where we're going to take some urgent action, where we're not going to fall back on the neoliberal idea that this is all about individual choice, that we should just recycle harder and vote with our wallets. And instead, we're going to start figuring out what size pitchfork Exxon executives wear.
There is, I think, in this younger generation but even older people there's a realization. I mean, a lot of our audience is older demographic, and I think almost to a person understand the urgency of this situation. Aphorism is a ding word. I also wanted to mention the fact that, from what I understand, you're somewhat optimistic even as the circumstance of the world is dire. In your latest, The Lost Cause, there is some hope.
Yeah, look, I think optimism is useless. Optimism is just fatalism, right? The idea the world's going to get better no matter what we do. But hope is really powerful. Hope is the idea that, if we change our circumstances even just a little, we might ascend the gradient towards a better world. And from this new vantage point, figure out some way that we can do stuff that we can't see from where we are now, ways to make things even better and better still and better again. And so, hope, the belief that what we do matters, that we have agency, that's a really powerful feeling. And I'm foursquare for hope. We can hang optimism, but this is a very hopeful book.
I'm really excited about getting into it. Normally I get into your stuff ahead of time, but today it's all just come the end of the year a little bit too quickly.
I wrote 9 books during lockdown. I write when I'm in. So you're not the only one who's having a hard time keeping up. My last book was out in September. My next book is out in February. My agent just sold another one. I mean, there's a lot going on.
It's terrific. Yeah, it's true. You are prolific to the nth. Hey, listen, come back and see us. And The Lost Cause is getting such great reviews. I mean, really, you're getting tremendous reviews, and I can't wait to get into it. We encourage everybody to pick it up. And there'll be a link to it in our description of this episode, so you'll have a chance to pick it up that way as well.
This was my pleasure. The book's a national bestseller as of last week. And
wow, that's great.
Really
Congratulations.
Talk to you guys about it.
Look at you. Really, really, really cool. So we look forward to your next visit in the new year. Happy New Year and all that stuff. And Cory, congratulations on The Lost Cause. All right. Cory Doctorow, everybody.
Off to the airport.
I love it. That's really great. Wow. What a successful, imaginative guy. Amazing.
The Mark Thompson Show.
We just have a few minutes here at the end of the show. We've been running behind all today because we've had such great visitors and such great conversations. And, Norman Lear's passing. We did a whole thing at the beginning of the show about that. And, we get into good conversations that were wide-ranging with John Rothmann. And then we, get into a conversation with David Katz and Cory and Thank you, Kim. You know, one of the things not many people realize is that Kim has increasingly, as this show has evolved over the year, has gone from just being, you know, like the news person who comes in and sort of, you know, does her thing with the news, to taking on more of a role when it comes to editorial stuff, when it comes to artistic stuff, when it comes to our thumbnails, when it comes to conversations around content. Kim is increasingly someone who has a bigger and bigger role. And I'm very grateful for that, because one of the frustrations I had, and I'm kind of sort of just reflecting on the last year here, I hadn't planned to, but just as I've started this thought, one of my frustrations was, oh, I see, I've got to take this thing to YouTube and I've got to do all the work and I've got to create a show every day, and then everybody just jumps on board. And that I was actually ready to do, and it was pretty, but then it gets tiring. It gets, you know, month after month of that. It's like, hey, man, I need some help here. And Kim has really stepped up and given me that help. And I'm really grateful to you for doing that, Kim. Yeah.
That's nice. That's nice that you said that. Thank you.
Little heavy-handed with the, I think, with the bouncing people. You know.
I love Walter. He puts in $10 down and says, "Safe travels, Mark, and for Kim, drive it like you stole it." That's right. I'm gonna drive it like I stole it, Walter.
I think Kim is excited about doing the show without me on one level, but she appreciates me. But she also. But here's my thing on Kim. You know, I always tell you the absolute truth about everything, and we live out loud on the show. If we have issues or challenges, we always share them with you. And I'll tell you something about Kim. So, Kim, one of my frustrations with Kim is that she doesn't feel enough confidence. Like, I think she's very talented, and I want her to feel more confidence because I think she's very good. And she always goes, "Oh, but I can't do this, I can't do that." And I go, "Kim, you are great. I mean, you have all of these magnificent aspects to what you do as a broadcaster and a news person." And so I want her to feel that. And I think she's now evolved to a place where I think she's kind of looking forward to me being, hitting her up. So she's made the whole transition. Heather Kennedy for a 10-spot. Big shout out. Even though you'll be away next week on my birthday. Oh, no, Heather, rude, she says. Here's $10 for a drink or some Dramamine or something.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Heather Kennedy. Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you
early birthday, sister.
so much.
I'd like to tell you, Heather, that Courtney's birthday is Sunday. And so it's kind of a big deal. We have birthdays. And my birthday is the day after Christmas. So this December is a very big birthday month. And now with Heather Kennedy as well with a birthday next week, we can add it to the list of birthdays that roll around in December. Very cool. Karen Combs, big shout out.
Big shout out.
How about a 20 from Karen Combs? Thanks for making this crap year more palatable. Palatable is a ding word. Have a wonderful vacation. Thanks to the team for holding down the fort while Mark cruises the Amazon. Love you guys. Thank you, Karen. Karen Combs. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I'm so taken by all the support. It's very good. Wes, thank you for a 5-spot.
Big shout
out to Wes, who's with us all along the way. And Luis. Mark, we're not getting enough of a daily dosage of Kim. Big shout out, Luis.
Big shout out.
Thank you for the 10-spot. Before leaving on your celebrity cruise, would you arrange to have her fill in for you on KFI? McAllister Mondays. Anyone? Yeah, well, I think she'd be great on KFI, but I don't make the decisions on KFI. I make the decisions on this show. So
I think I got enough on my plate.
The lady, that's right, she already does 3 shows. What do you want? The Lady Beatrice with a quick
big shout out.
5-spot. Have a safe trip and have a good Christmas. See you after the new year. And thank you, Lady Beatrice. Thank you, everybody. Really cool. Oh, here is a Beth Farmer, Love Rothmann, and Katz with a 10-spot.
Big shout out.
Yeah, Rothmann and Katz, very good today. We'll break those out as separate videos, won't we, Albert? And Pinky
cool
Cerritos.
Big shout out.
Yeah.
$1 a day. What's that, Kim?
It was cool to have him back to back. Usually we have David Katz tomorrow, but he's going to be traveling, so he was bumped for up to today. But it was cool to have him one right after the other like that. That's not something we normally do. Yeah.
That's really, really true.
There's never been anything like this.
The love boat, says Ricky. Awesome last show, Mark. Le deseo mucha felicidad en su viaje. Hasta luego, amigo. Enjoy your trip, essentially, right?
Very much.
And
Happiness
until later. Until
friend. Yeah.
Friend is amigo. Is that what's a friend? That's what amigo means?
You know that though.
I also saw I've seen some great comments. I'll go back and read some of the comments today. Happy travels, says Michael D. on Carnival COVID cruises. Thank you.
That's not fake. That's real.
Oh, thank you. I've lost all my Fauci drops, Albert, are lost in the.
You do not know what you are talking about.
I've lost all of those. Bon voyage, happy birthday, happy Christmas, and a Merry New Year, and aloha, Mark. Thank you so much, Karen Cooper.
Big shout out.
Hey, which one do you use, Mark Thompson?
Yeah, I've lost that too, Albert. I don't have this one. Yeah, it's crazy. Safe travels, Mark. Kim, you'll do great. Thanks, Albert. Yeah, Albert, thank you.
Albert, thank you.
And Kim,
how are you?
Really up to the task, so I'm not at all worried. As I've mentioned to you, but I'll mention it again because it's important that you know this, we have lots of content that we are banking, that we've recorded. Are we doing something with Raj today or not,
I don't
Kim?
think so.
No?
He didn't respond, yeah.
Okay, so we'll have Raj in the new year. But we have a lot of content banked, and I'm looking forward to some of that being run. I'll try to catch whatever I can.
Having Raj in the new year might mean that the Niners are having a great season, and we're on the way to the big game.
Oh, yes. This year with our quarterback. Albert, I haven't talked to you since we mopped the floor with the Eagles. What happened there? That was unreal. I thought that was going to be a closer game, didn't you?
I was hoping for not a closer game. That was a great game, by the way. It was nice to have a relaxing. It did start off a little iffy in the first quarter, but
the first quarter was trouble. Although holding them to field goals, you thought, pretty.
Yeah,
big.
6-0 is different than 14-0.
Right
to start.
Right.
So.
Albert, thank you.
Yeah.
7 straight drives with touchdowns. Very impressive.
They are an impressive team. Joe Fong says, safe journey and very happy early birthday. The show will be in good hands. Joe, big shout out.
Big shout out.
Mm-hmm. Everyone who has contributed and does contribute through the end of the year, I want you to keep in mind that when I return, I will be bestowing upon all of you the rod of equity and mercy. So there is that additional inducement to support Kim in my absence. Exactly. So
I'm not gonna cry. I'm not gonna cry.
I am somewhat emotional, but
You got Joe? Did you get Joe Fong already?
I just got Joe Fong.
I'd be willing to bet my lunch that there's alcohol involved.
I mean, I think there's already alcohol involved with Kim. She didn't even remember that I just did Joe Fong like 4 seconds
Where
ago.
are my weed smokers at?
Yeah, maybe it's, I don't know.
Oh, my God.
I know there's nothing I can do. I mean,
Someone did this to spoil our Christmas.
maybe you'll get a new computer for Christmas. That'd be nice.
Did you
Thank
really
Daniel.
just do that?
Yeah, I know. It's smash the like button on the way out.
Smashed it with your iron rod.
There's a lot going on, and we'll cover it for you. Some great conversations. Thank you, Ren, in the days ahead. Kim will ride herd over everything. I think
Safe
Anthony Davis
travels.
may be back next week for you, Kim.
Excellent. I love
I'm in
that.
touch with him.
Okay.
And all your regulars, Katz and Rothmann.
Oh, no.
and- yes. I'm told that people
sucker.
vanish regularly on cruises.
What?
Oh,
What
no.
do you mean?
Stay-
Falling overboard? What?
For the Mark
Yes,
Johnson
stay away
Show.
from the railing.
Bye-bye.
Oh. Shadow Stevens will be among those things that happen.
Bye-bye.
The after party live is going on.
and we'll do it
Until
live.
next time, bye-bye.
We'll miss you, Mark. Bye.